This is Women's Leadership Success. And today I'm thrilled to interview Lorraine Marchand. She is the Executive Managing Director of Meritive, formerly IBM Watson Health. Welcome.
Thank you, Sabrina. It's my pleasure.
And you've written a great book, The Innovation Mindset. And I'd like you to just tell us a little more about your background. And then I have a story I want you to share with us. So tell us more about your background.
Oh, sure. Well, I think that, my background has really been in corporate entrepreneurship, as well as startup and smaller company entrepreneurship. So I consider myself someone who started innovating at a very young age. I can share a story with the audience about what inspired me if you wish.
I do want you to share that story. I love that story.
Oh, well, thank you. And so I've just had an opportunity to do my work and to bring new products and services and ideas to market across corporations and startups where I've been the co-founder, smaller entities as a coach, a mentor, and a professor of students. So my goal and my mission really is to enable innovation and entrepreneurship to help to create an ecosystem where people can get the resources and the access that they need to be successful, because I want everybody that has an idea that is inspired to try to bring it to market to have an opportunity to do that, because I just think it's one of the best things about life.
I totally agree with you. And we have something in common. You said your father was an inventor, and my grandfather lived with us when I grew up, and he was an inventor. So that, that kind of thinking was going on. But tell the story about what happened when you were a little kid with your dad in the restaurant.
So my dad was a serial inventor at the time. We didn't really have the word innovation yet, because of course, inventing was all about intellectual property and trademark and copyright secrets. And innovation now is about different kinds of incremental improvements or even process improvements that all can have an impact on the commercial market. So he was more of an inventor. Mm-hmm. And growing up, when my brother and I were growing up, my dad would always challenge us to find at least 3 solutions to every problem we encountered. And sometimes he'd create problems for us to solve. And one summer when I was 13 and my brother was 10, he took us to the Hot Shops cafeteria, which was a franchise of diners in the Baltimore, Washington area. And our challenge, as we sat in the big red vinyl booths, enjoying our breakfast of orange juice and scrambled eggs in the morning for 3 days in a row, was to observe what was slowing down table turnover. So we had marble composition books. We had 3-color pens. We each had a stopwatch, and we wrote down what we observed. We even talked to the waitresses and the bus boys. We timed activities. And after 3 days, we found out what the problem was. And interestingly, it was these pesky sugar packets, because people would notoriously come into the diner, dispense the sugar in their coffee or their iced tea, throw the packet on the table, the granules spewed everywhere, and it was taking many extra minutes for the busboys and the waitresses to clean that up and get new customers into the booth. But my dad didn't let us stop there, because he was the man of 3 solutions. So then he guided us through a process of identifying 3 solutions. So we came up with things like, well, why don't we use liquid sugar? Or why don't we put a trash can over here? But the solution that we ended up taking to prototype was actually an item that we called the sugar cube. And it was a plastic receptacle. It held the packets on one side, the discarded refuse on the other. But to make sure that it had value beyond just being a container, because my dad was always thinking, it had 4 sides. So people could put advertising in it from the local advertisers. We spoke with the head manager. She actually loved the product. She loved the idea. She introduced us to the district manager. The prototype went on to become produced. And within about 6 months, our sugar cubes were all throughout the Hot Shops cafeteria system in the Baltimore, Washington area.
Wow. That's incredible. And you were how old?
13.
13. What a great start. You know, having read your book, and I do coaching in companies, and what I find is seems to be a lot of people that don't have an innovative mindset or are not able to think out of the box. And one thing I wonder, why is that? And how do we begin to develop it?
Well, that is a great question. And, if I can just hearken back to what I learned from that story with my dad, it was that he really inculcated in us an insatiable curiosity, always asking questions, never being satisfied with the status quo. So I think curiosity is critical. He also imbued in us a desire for change. Change was good, making progress, making things better. So we embraced change. And it was all about a problem-solving orientation, as I mentioned. And so we developed a passion for problem solving. So to me, those three components make up the innovation mindset: the insatiable curiosity, the passion for problem solving, and the embracing of change. And I think that in corporations, because they are designed for repeat, for scale, for systematizing things, for process so that they can replicate it better, faster, a lot of times these really important characteristics and behaviors, they end up getting washed out or diluted within the corporate environment and within the corporate culture. And I think it's an unintended consequence of being a really high producing corporation, is that you wash this out. Because what happens is, in your coaching, I'm sure too, it's the corporations that come to consultants that read books like mine and other books that you've profiled and say, I really do want the people in my organization to be more creative, to embrace innovation, to bring new ideas to the fore. And how do I encourage them to do that? So in a way, they've created their own problem with all the very components that make a corporation successful. But now we've got to get back to, how do we have that balance of a corporation that performs well for shareholders, but one that can also really embody the culture and the mindset of innovation?
So what is the way to do that? How do we do that?
Well, I think that curiosity has to be encouraged. And I think problem solving has to be encouraged. I think change has to be encouraged. So these are important values. They are important ways of working. And in my work with corporations, I really start with an understanding of the culture and of the values. I'm working with a large pharmaceutical company right now, and a value is curiosity. Be your own boss. Bring change forward. So I think those have to be embodied in the culture very early on. But that's at the highest level of the organization, as you know, where it has to start. But then it has to be pulled through, and it's going to be up to the leaders of department, the leaders of teams. They have to welcome the change. They have to try to encourage it. And I think one of the big ways to do this is to make it okay to fail. And I don't really like the word fail. Like in my book, I talk about the fact that you're never failing. You're always pivoting if you're constantly learning and improving. But I'm going to use the word fail in this instance, because innovation has to be about trial and error. Sometimes you get it right. Sometimes you don't. You always pick up the pieces and move in a new direction. But if in a corporation, the leader doesn't allow you to experiment, and for sometimes those experiments not to work out as planned, then people will get discouraged and they will think that trying and not being successful isn't an option. So we have to make it okay to fail. And for example, I love the way Jeff Bezos has talked about this at Amazon, where he actually created an incentive system that encouraged failure, because he knew that if people were failing, they were probably trying more. And I believe that it's probably one of the reasons that Amazon is considered to have an innovative culture because they encourage people to try and to fail and then to learn from those mistakes.
Beautiful. One of the things, I actually had a client earlier today, a brand new person, and I asked her what was the biggest problem if she solved it would change her career. And she said, I don't have any time to do anything. And, what I said is, unless you find a way to carve some out, there's no way to really grow your career. But it seems like we don't leave time for people to brainstorm or come up with solutions. Most of the meetings I've been in recently, it's almost like we've got to come up with the answer to the problem right away, and there's no space for kind of checking things out or trying on different hats. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that's absolutely right. Coming up with ideas, brainstorming solutions, it's very thoughtful work, and it happens best when we have an opportunity to be reflective and feel creative, and we have to disconnect, right? We have to disconnect from the busy machine that programs every moment of our day and has us so much of the time in list checking mode. And we've got to be able to sequester some of that time to really do some conscious and some deliberate thinking. And I have seen companies that encourage this. I've had bosses that encouraged it. For example, in one company that I worked in, we had meeting and video free during COVID Fridays. And, Fridays at noon, everybody was supposed to unplug. And that was your time to be thoughtful, creative, think about the week, not do your expense report, like don't fill it with more busy work that you didn't get to earlier in the week. It was really meant for you to just take time, unplug, get with colleagues, think and be creative. And she went so far as to ask people for just a little light report. How did you use the time? What was valuable about it? Did you come up with anything interesting? Because she really wanted to make sure that people were using those 4 or 5 hours that she was helping them build into the week for exactly what they were designed for: disconnecting, being reflective and thoughtful about problems they were facing in the workplace or solutions or other things that they wanted to work on. So unfortunately, we live in such a busy state of professionalism that we do have to program some of that free time in.
Yeah, we have to leave the space.
Yeah.
Either individually or in the company, for sure. So say more about the process of generating new ideas.
Well, so I'm a big believer that we first have to start with a very solid, well-defined problem statement. And again, I think that this first stage of the process is also something that people need to train themselves to do better. We can just be on such autopilot day in and day out that we're not looking around and even observing problems that are right in front of our faces, things that need to be solved, that we just have become immune to them. So it starts with becoming more observant about the problems in our workplace, in our schools, in our neighborhood, in science, medicine, et cetera, making sure that you're a student of observing them. It's also important to make sure when you're observing a problem that it's actually happening in a repeated fashion. It's not just a one-off. And in order to encourage people to do more problem observation, which I think is the beginning of ideation and the innovation process, I actually recommend keeping a journal. Now, this could be a little list on your iPad or your iPhone today, but I've made it a habit for a great many years every day to try to observe 3 problems, just like my dad taught me. I've never strayed from that. And I'll write them down. And sometimes they're inane and sometimes they're really big things. But when I have my problem journal, then I'm able to look back at different points of time. And sometimes I see something that flowed into work and that I actually want to work on. So it's got to start with a well-defined problem statement. What is the problem? who's experiencing it, what's significant about it, what pain is it causing, asking those right kind of questions around the problem. And then I do believe in the 3 solutions. And why do you need 3? Well, first of all, doing nothing is a solution. I mean, doing nothing is a choice. So that's already 1. And then you need to come up with at least 2 others so that you can do some comparison and contrast. And I just think that if you have a set of 3 solutions to evaluate against each other, the one that wins will have been compared and contrasted against the other 2 for fit, right? Because your solution has to be the best fit. So that process of ideating solutions and then choosing the one for best fit is really important. And then I think that kind of leads us to the how. And we use the term brainstorming. We can use a lot of different words to talk about how we get there. I like methods that involve storytelling. Having spent a lot of my career in the healthcare field, it's not hard to tell a story about a patient or a caregiver or a physician. And we can learn a lot about the problem and solutions that are going to fit through storytelling. And there are any number of other methodologies that can be used. You can do it in your own head. You can do it with other people. But I also think that you need to use some kind of brainstorming methodology to get those plethora of ideas out there, and then to use that selection process of going from 3 to 1.
Beautiful. And I want to mention that in your book, you have a lot of, in every chapter, there's usually some questions you can ask at the stage you're at, which are great questions. But your stories are so great. Can you share a story of somebody that innovated something and tell us what happened?
Well, sure. I've got about 8 innovators in focus in the book. So I've done profiles on real life innovators, people just like you and me that have observed problems and created solutions and their experiences. And, you know, one of them that I really like is Sarah Apgar. And Sarah was a Princeton graduate. She was also in the military, and she was a volunteer firefighter. And she was really big on fitness, given her background. Mm-hmm. And she had the idea of using something that she created at the fire station. It was a steel hose, and she fashioned it into a piece of fitness equipment. And the beauty of it is, if you're working from home, like we were in COVID, and you didn't want to put in a full gym, she designed a whole set of exercises that you could use with this one piece of fitness equipment. But Sarah had a lot of naysayers in her experience and in her network, and she was young when she did this. She pushed them aside. She knew she had an idea. She was on Shark Tank. She raised $250,000 in order to bring the Fit Fighter to market. And it's just, you know, spreading like wildfire, so to speak, across the country. And she's been phenomenally successful. And I just really love the story because it's just that simplicity of, you know, right in my own environment, a need, a problem, an observation about parts that I had right under my nose, and how I was able to create something, bring it to market, and now create an entire company and an entire market within the fitness industry around it.
Beautiful. You said there were a lot of things that happened during COVID where people innovated things. Can you share some examples of that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think on the largest scale, you know, outside of the vaccine, I love the story of how Tesla Motors, with the battery, that they brought the price down considerably, partnered with a major diagnostic and device company called Medtronic in order to fashion mobile ventilators that could be taken into hospitals and nursing homes and in SWAT camps and so forth, as things were being set up and you're trying to bring care and ventilators. So I love the idea that there was this partnership that was created around understanding the components of the device and the ventilator, but knowing that it needed to be mobile and it needed a very inexpensive and a long-lasting battery. So I love that one. We all have stories that we can share. Here we are on Zoom today. Zoom would probably not be as successful as it is today if if COVID hadn't given it a little bit of its push out there. The same thing, I think, with advances like telecare. And I even think about robots in hospitals today. Definitely because of the sanitation protocols in hospitals and the need for some, people not to be able to come into work, it really has created much more reliance and a lot more use cases around how robots can be used in hospitals for sanitation. And, one of my favorite stories, there's a wonderful, very old company, really solid company. It's been around for, I believe it's been over 100 years. It's called Ecolab. And Ecolab is the manufacturer of different chemicals and supplies that are used by hospitals and hotels, et cetera, for a lot of different uses. And what I love about them, because I talk in the book about the importance of voice of the customer, right? We have to stay really close to our customer constantly. And they have 3,000 field reps. And the job of these individuals is to call on the customer, call on the account, observe them in their natural habitat, and then come back to headquarters and give ideas about ways that new products can be created or products can be improved. And one of the things that the hospitals and the hotels were struggling with is that one of the Ecolab sanitation fluids took 20 minutes to dry. And that meant that, if you're in a hospital setting, you can't have patients waiting 20 minutes to get into the emergency room or turning over a hotel suite, et cetera. So the field force person brought this back. Ecolab worked on it real quickly because they knew it was important. They had other technology that they had used to allow chemicals to dry really fast. And they were able to take this sanitation product, create it in such a way that it could dry within 5 seconds, and redeployed it back out to their customers with just astounding results. Really happy customers, solved a COVID-related problem, and a new product now that is just being used as a current way of doing business.
Very cool. And part of what I hear you saying is one should always be looking for the problems. Like you said, keep the journal. What are problems that need to be solved? You mentioned pivoting, and that when it's not working, you pivot. First off, how do you know when to pivot? And can you give us some examples of products that came out of pivoting?
Oh, well, yes. So there are a lot of products that came out of pivoting. So, we can talk about the fact that Netflix, the original purpose of Netflix was really not to, stream video, but, that was born out of a pivot. PayPal was born out of a pivot, and also during a very challenging time in Elon Musk's career when a lot of other things, had not worked out for him. So PayPal came out of a pivot. YouTube grew out of a pivot. It was actually sort of a video service for pet videos that grew into YouTube. So I just think there are so many examples, and I think a number of pivots that have come out of COVID as well. In the book, I talk about Prava Healthcare, which is a Bangladesh private healthcare system. And before COVID, they weren't involved in diagnostics or vaccines or anything like this. But because of COVID, they had to stand up telecare. They had to get their lab certified to do diagnostics for COVID. And they had to, do a lot of other important infrastructure adjustments in order to try to address the COVID crisis, which they did really well. And that was just a major pivot that allowed them to become a big player in Bangladesh in terms of stemming the COVID crisis.
Beautiful. What do serial entrepreneurs, what can they do to increase their odds of success?
Yes. Well, I love this one because to me, it's all around de-risking their product, the marketplace, the commercial potential. And so what I like to talk about here is there are so many different ways to de-risk. You need to de-risk your technology so that you can eliminate any technical error. So there are very there are very practical ways that you can do that in terms of the design of your technology. Other ways that you can de-risk would be marketplace risk. If you have the right kind of market intelligence, you understand the competition, you're keeping eyes on the landscape, you're doing regular customer research, you can certainly de-risk from a marketing and a marketplace standpoint so that you know that your solution is what the market needs at that particular time and that there are no reasons or external constraints why it might be rejected. You can also financially de-risk. And so a really important area for any entrepreneur is the ability to raise capital and being able to raise capital in such a way that will give you running lane for some period of time as you get your company up and running and you go through the different iterations of your product and working your way to success. You definitely need capital. So there are ways to de-risk financially. And then finally, you need to de-risk from an operational standpoint. And what I mean by that is when you're running your business, you need to have a solid handle on your business operations. And so you can de-risk by having the right kind of talent, the right kind of processes and workflows in place, the right kind of IT and system and management programs in place. So I do talk in the book about a whole risk matrix where you can evaluate these different risks that you might be facing as you bring your solution to market, and then ways that you can mitigate each of those risks in order to improve your chances of commercial success.
I think that just that conversation alone is worth buying the book. The whole thing of de-risking, what a great thing. You also, just to end up, you were talking about some of the problems that women have in terms of getting their products to market. And I have a relative that started a faux cheese company who's doing quite well, but has had a lot of problems getting funding and different things. So what's your experience with that, and what do you suggest?
Yeah, so I have a lot of passion around helping women entrepreneurs. And, you know, what I have found at like a macro level is that women still only represent about 5 to 7% of venture capitalists. I think that's a problem. We need more women investors because when we have women investors are going to take a second look at a woman entrepreneur and consider possibly investing in her, helping her along, providing more resources. There are some great examples of some VCs that are run by women investors and invest in women, and they're having phenomenal results. The other thing that I've noticed in terms of women is a lot of times they are intimidated about raising capital. Maybe they're not feeling real comfortable with their financial acumen. Maybe they don't feel as though they can ask the smartest questions when they're sitting with an investor. There are definitely ways that women can increase and improve their financial competency and aptitude with practice, with the right kind of mentors, and they can be much more astute and effective that way. And then the third thing is women need to think more strategically about their own networking. And, you know, what we found is that women tend to network with other individuals with whom they feel comfortable, people in their ecosystem or in the same job class or friends. And they might not feel so comfortable going to a networking event where there are attorneys and bankers and accountants and other kinds of individuals that, when you think about it, you know, the legal and the financial aspects of getting a business up and running, those are really important operational partners. And women may not feel as comfortable networking with those kinds of individuals. So they are cutting themselves short of some really valuable resources that are important in terms of getting your company up and running and just making sure you have the right kind of guidance as you go through the process of raising capital and managing the business and hiring new staff. So I think the financial and the networking are definitely two areas where I know women can improve. And I have some examples of that in the book as well.
Great. So we're just about done. What last piece of advice do you want to leave the audience with?
I do not want you to have any fear. Do not fear failure. If you believe that this is something that you need to do, then you have to do it. It's like that itch that you've got to scratch. And if you don't do it, you're going to go through your life regretting it and thinking about it. So make a calculated bet, of course, but I say if this is something that you want to do, do it. And I've tried to lay it out in a very simple and straightforward way with the stages or the laws. There's a lot of mentors and help available to you. So just get out there and do it.
Thank you. It's been a great pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sabrina. It's been my pleasure.